Welcome, everyone. I'm really happy that you're here with us today. You will see a lot of sun coming in my way. I'm facing south. I'm in the Gerard and Woodbine area, and there's a big tree outside, but there's no leaves. We're in the fall. This is the Fall Gathering Divergence Multi-Arts Festival and Conference, and I'm excited to have this session focused primarily on the publication we just launched, which is looking at art workers, artists, their thoughts around the transformation, the cultural transformation that is required for the Canadian arts sector. I have a whole list of contributors that we'll be in conversation with today. Before we do, however, I want to acknowledge the land on which this digital transference occurs, and I want to invite Charles Smith, convener for Cultural Tourism of the Arts Movement Ontario, to lead us out.
Thank you, Kevin, and welcome everyone this afternoon. We're calling to you or speaking to you from Toronto, as others would call it. And this is a very important space to be in, as it, for time immemorial, it has been inhabited by the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. Others have come after, obviously, the Chippewa, the Wendat, the Mississauga, the Credit. And we are on Treaty 13, a land claim of the Mississauga of the Credit on the Greater Toronto Area. I say it's important because, in this territory, we have, through the work of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, what they had as an agreement called a dish with one spoon wampum. That is a covenant between the two confederacies about the relationship to the land and to each other. And the relationship to the land, as I'm sure most of you know, was that whoever had need of things they had to survive and to thrive in life, they should be able to take. But they also had a responsibility, and that responsibility was to make sure that the land was there for those who lived during their time and for those who lived generations after. The importance of that is to understand that Mother Earth is what feeds us. And we have to basically have relationship with Mother Earth so we can, A, survive and thrive, but also an understanding amongst each other that we take what we need and no more. And that's so important. We always talk about this, CPAMO, in the arts because, we know the inequities that have existed for quite some time. CPAMO began in, 2009? Kevin and I and Victoria have hooked up since about 2010, and we've been doing forums like this for quite some time because these are needed. These are very needed to talk about these very principles about how we in the arts ensure that all artistic voices have space, have appropriate space, have equitable space to do what they're doing. And so that means we have to raise our voices. And it also means that others need to be able to join in with us to share what they've accumulated over years through the inappropriate policies of various funding bodies and arts and culture policies in the country. So again, coming out of the learnings from the dish with one spoon wampum, how do we share? And how do we respect each other? How do we respect the earth that gives us life? Kevin, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Charles. And I also invite everyone in the chat, if you want to drop in the chat where you are. I'm not going to assume that you're all in a Treaty 13 territory. And I also want to extend that I'm from another indigenous land, and that the entire Western Hemisphere is indigenous land. And that land you may know as Jamaica, but indigenous land space is Ziamaka, land of wood and water, which is home of the tribe of the Tainos that inhabited that space, which nurtured my birth and which I arrived into the arts at a very young age. It's with such pleasure that I speak a little bit about the publication, as this is something that came out of the pandemic, where it's our second publication, and we realized that we didn't really need to be printing programs anymore. We were no longer in spaces the same way. And so we decided to use the budget from these particular items. And this was what we came up with. This is our second publication. Our first focused primarily on anti-Black racism work. And this one focused primarily on the space and time we're in right now, which I feel a lot of artists and arts workers for a long period of time have been having the conversation about what is required to begin to shift the landscape in which we are working. And so from the publication, which is called an anthology of envisioning Canadian cultural transformation. This is volume 1. I'm currently working on the second volume, which will arrive in our spring festival. It was compiled and edited by Charles and I primarily, and the project team included myself, Victoria, and Charles, and the contributors are many, and I want to just honor them here because not everybody will be here to speak. But we have Cara Loft, we have Amah Harris, we have Ilene Sova, Erin Jones, Anita La Silva, Charles C. Smith, Rodney, Dr. Taiwo Afolabi, Ruth Howard, Fanny Martin, Nova Bhattacharya, Cyrus Marcus Ware, Charmaine Headley, Lemia Reddick, Thandiwe McCarthy, Shannon Litzenberger, Bridget McIntosh, and Ian Espinay. There are many things I want to acknowledge all the funders that actually supported that particular publication. Canadian Council for the Arts, Canadian Heritage, Ontario Arts Council, and Ontario itself, Toronto Arts Council. We have Barrett and Welch, we have English Testing Canada, Lesage Arts, we had Randolph College, CIBC, and the Propeller Project. If you're interested, it's available online for purchase. But right now, what we're going to do is we decided, because some of the artists involved in the publication are also practicing artists, still doing production, still doing amazing work, we wanted to take some time to also showcase their work in an artistic way as well. So I do believe that we find many artists who are intersecting with both writing, thought processes towards transformation in the arts, as well as their artistic practice. Make sure I centered the conversation and publication, and also the intergenerational relationships that many, many IBPOC artists have had within Canada's artistic landscape. First, in the section we call Digging into Legacies, we have an article by Amah Harris called Journeying into Legacies. And she excavates the history of Black Theatre Canada, her bringing as a diverse nationality of Caribbean theatre artists, an instrumental person to what Black theatre has become in Canada. Welcome, Amah.
Well, it was a pleasure being invited by CPAMO to write about my legacy. Excuse me. You all were very generous because the word number that you gave me, I asked for an extension. I started at home. I started at home from Dominica, not Santo Domingo, but Dominique. And in Dominica, my mom is Jamaican, my father Dominican, and they owned land. And as a little girl, I remember we lived on the land with them, and someone came in to the area and had been cut and got gangrene and died. And my mother freaked out. She couldn't believe that this was happening. And so she went down to the government and she lobbied. And she lobbied for money for a clinic. And she lobbied for money to train the nurse. And we got a clinic in the area because a lot of the estates had small villages in the area. And then herself and dad realized there was no school in the area. And again, they went and lobbied for a school, and they were told that they would have to build it. And when they were finished building it, then they could send the receipts. I guess they thought mommy and daddy were going to send us there to school, but they had no intentions of doing that. They ordered materials from the US and homeschooled us. And so they built the school, and they did send the receipts, and the government did honor the receipts. And as a little girl, I'm watching all of this. And that's all I knew. I just knew it as normal for people to just take that on, helping people that really and truly were not related to us. We as children didn't know them. And I was fascinated by that. And then tuberculosis hit Dominica. Well, at some point, my eldest brother at 13, I think he got a little fed up of my mother being his mother, his teacher, his priest, everything. And so mommy took all of us, she had 8 children. She took all of us down to meet our grandmother in the Roseau. And when she was there, she realized that, okay, she was going to move into her own home because that was temporary. And we moved into a rented house. But while we were young, tuberculosis took over Dominica. And Mommy realized there were a lot of people who couldn't afford to, to buy their own medication and stuff. And so she formed the anti-tuberculosis campaign. Again, that seemed natural to me. Something needed to happen, and therefore she did it. And she did so many of those types of things. So I grew up with that sort of activism, not giving it a name. I was older when I realized it was activism. And then I met a very close friend of hers. We call her Sissy Corderon. And she was from a very, very well-known family. And in Dominica, nous parlons Creole in Dominica. We speak a language derived from African French and Kalinago, the indigenous people. And although the Europeans called it patois, a corruption of, we know it's a language because Afrikaans was born the same time with our languages in Dominica and Jamaica and everywhere. And so in the 70s, Eugenia Childs, who was prime minister at that time, said, okay, this is it. And we joined with St. Lucie, St. Lucia, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Haiti, Marie-Galante, Saint Martin. And we formed a committee and a commission along with the French Africa from the continent. And so we are in all communication with them all the time. And it's big in Dominica. It's huge in Dominica. And we have a traditional wear. And Sissy Corderon, in those days, of course, speaking a language that derived from an African language, people wouldn't want their children to do that because, of course, anything African was taboo. And Sissy Corderon, coming from this prominent family, said, like, to hell with that. And she taught hundreds and hundreds of us to be proud of wearing the outfit. And she taught us dances, she taught us songs. Now, my mother, being Jamaican, within 2 years, she knew the language. She learned the language. And she gave speeches all over the island in the language. And we were encouraged to learn the language of people. And because we are Dominican, and so we should know the language. And it was an exciting time for me. And Sissy Corderon wrote operettas. She wrote operettas, Dominican operettas, which again was an activism situation. And I was so excited about that. So excited about that. And my grandmother loved music, and she bought us this beautiful piano so that we could take piano lessons. And it was just fantastic. It was a beautiful life. I'm not saying there weren't problems, because we observed that, the whites, of course, were our administrators, so to speak. Of course, now we all have our own governments. But it was exciting for us to see all of this. And very, very young, myself and some friends formed a theater company. And we did a lot of Dominican work. We also did Shakespeare. We did all kinds of work. And I didn't see that as activism. I just saw that as normal. And then there was a huge Shakespearean festival, the 100 Years of Shakespeare. And I played Portia from The Merchant of Venice. And it always struck me, although it was a fantastic thing, and I won the British Council Award for it, it always bothered me when that speech I made to Shylock, it just seemed like he was targeted. It really, really bothered me that they treated Shylock the way they treated Shylock. Didn't click. I was very young. I was being, 17 or something like that, or 16 when I did this. And that stuck in my mind. And then I said, okay, I want to study theater. I had done very well at school. I had gone to what is now called a college, but in those days it was advanced level, past grade 12. And I want to study. And I loved science and I loved theater. And I told my parents I wanted to go away and study theater. And their friends thought, what? Beryl and Hugh, you're going to allow your child to go and study theater? Medicine, theater, that you can't go and study theater. You can either do this thing or you can't. And my parents said she wants to study theater. And I got a scholarship, 2 scholarships, one to go to BAM School of Fine Arts and another one to go to University of Windsor. Fascinating. I went to a convent from the time I was 4, and the principal was a nun. And when she saw the work that I was doing, and she heard I wanted to do theater, she said, "Okay, we're going to pay for your first year of your university." And so I went up, and Dr. Maria Piscator was called up to the school. They had a beautiful theater similar to the Mervish theaters, as a professional theater associated with the the university. And I was cast as Clytemnestra in Jean-Paul Sartre's The Flies, which was a powerful play that had been done during Nazi occupation France, during Nazi occupation. And Piscator and Sartre were so close friends. And he came over, he ran away, of course, because they were after him. And he went to New York and he found a foundation and he did the Flies. And he was dead. And so the wife came up to do this play. And it was for the professional theater. And of course, I was doing theater and science. Nobody knew I was doing a joint degree because they would have thought I was crazy. But there were the fine arts kids, and then there was me doing this. And I remember this actor, and he passed and he said, "Aren't you going to audition?" And I said, "No, I'm not in fine arts." And he said, "Forget that." I said, "But I need an appointment." And he said, "Go in." And I knocked and went in, and Dr. Piscator said to me, "Oh, come in." And the young woman who had the appointment said, "But I'm supposed to be in." And Piscator said, "You will wait outside." And we sat there and we talked forever. And then she cast me as Clytemnestra. An incredible experience. And I got a very good write-up in the papers. And again, that was another activism that began to register. It began to register there when I realized what that was about. And then I came up and went to university, to the university to do an education degree. And Black Theatre Canada was literally 3 minutes walk away from the faculty when it was on Spadina and Bloor. So when I graduated, I had the theater degree and now the education degree. I walked up the road and Madison Avenue, and I walked in to the theater, and the founder, Vera Kudjoe, said to me, "I'm looking for somebody to start this theater with me." And I thought, God, you have a strange sense of humor. Because I had done so much stuff in Dominica, I just wanted to be a young woman dealing with my acting by myself. I didn't want to be, it was like me one on God walking. I didn't want any responsibility for anybody else. So when she said that, it blew my mind, because for me, in my young mind, Canada and America were the same. My mother and father had met in New York, and Daddy had decided he didn't want to raise children in the States. And when they got married, they went to Jamaica first, and then they came to Dominica. So in my mind, I'm coming up to a place flush with Black theater. Canada and America the same. And when she said that to me, I thought, what? And she said, "Well, we need Black theater here." There had been one small theater, Georgia Brown had her theater, Georgia Boyd. But this was the first major Black theater, professional Black theater. And I thought, this is incredible. I am supposed to do this. And I stayed, and I thank God that I stayed. I learned so much from staying there. We wrote the original plays. We performed them. We directed them. We traveled all over the place. And it was really, really exciting. Then I left and decided I was going to do a master's degree. And I went to York University to do a master's, and the research I was doing, I was I had developed in Black Theatre Canada, I'd been allowed a platform to explore different types of original techniques that came out of me from being from the Caribbean. Okay, Dominica is very, very Africa-based, very Africa-based. And so there was a lot of that in it. And then I found, okay, they said, well, you have to prove first that the Caribbean has a culture. Hello. I thought, okay. And I started to do research that really bothered me because I was reading where they were trying, in the research, that Africans, in those days, the Europeans said Africans could be mated with orangutans. And I began to get a hate that was phenomenal. And I stopped. I stopped the degree and had to pray a lot. I became a born-again Christian at that point. I'm a Roman Catholic, still am. But I had to stand up in front of all these people and say, I hated you. And now I'm flushing myself from that hate because that is destructive. And then I started Theatre in the Rough. Theatre in the Rough was really an activism organization. We paralleled racism with apartheid in South Africa. And people said to me, there is no way that they're going to allow you to do this. And I said, well, God has moved me to do this. And so he will have to open the ways. And I say he, but I know God is beyond male or female. And so I started the theater. I remember this woman from South Africa. I went to a function and she was on stage talking, Tato Bereng. She died last year, I think it was. And I said, I've got to talk to her. And we spoke. And I thought, yeah, it's possible. And the theater happened. We were in, 20 boards of education in the province. We were across Canada. We were in the States. We went as far as South Africa. So we started with the Apartheid Festival in the 80s, and we finished in 1999 in Africa, South Africa, where we were asked to come and do conflict resolution, because we didn't just do the plays, we did experiential workshops afterwards, where people came face to face with the situations and had to decide what they wanted to do, because I knew if I said to them, this is what you must do, it might never happen. And some grandmothers said, okay, we need to talk to, we did the stories we make up, because, you know, as grandmothers, we make up stories on the spur of the moment. We need to tell a different type of story to the children. And other people said, we're going to go into grocery stores and we're going to take out groceries that we know came from South Africa, bring them to the cash register, and we're going to say, where are these from? And when they tell them South Africa, they're going to put it back. So there were different people taking different stands, and it was fantastic. Very stressful, but very, very fantastic, because you can imagine people didn't want to give us money to do this. And it was a professional theater. You had to pay people. I remember some Black actors actually would not speak with me because they were afraid they wouldn't get roles in what I would call the white theaters, because they're mainly white theaters. And I thought, that's okay. Some equity actors said, hell with that, we're acting with you because this is our work. And so it was fantastic. It was an incredible experience. For me, activism is from the soul. I'm just going to round up now. It's from the soul. At the turn of the century, I went back into the classroom. My sister is an accountant, and she kept saying, you need to have a pension. And so I went back into the classroom and I loved it. They said, become a principal. And I said, no, I came to be with the children. And I was an activist right there in the classroom, teaching science and teaching mainly science and English and theater. It was beautiful working with the kids and talking to them and letting them be proud of who they are, regardless of what part of the world they came from. I sent them to the grandmothers to come back with stories, and it was fabulous. And I just give God glory and praise. I must say that right alongside what I was doing, you had people like Dudley Roach, Charles Roach, Dudley Laws, Akua Cooper, Marlene Green. There were a lot of activists that were dealing with stuff and marches and all that was happening. Without that, really and truly, I don't think the theater could exist. Because you had to have those changes being made in policy and all of that for us to be able to justify what it is we're saying. The reason we paralleled the anti-racism work with apartheid in South Africa is but they tell us that Black people have this in their head. It's not real. Well, we were paralleling exact situations for apartheid where it was legalized. And so they couldn't tell us that anymore. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to share. Give God all the glory. Thank you.
Thank you, Amah. I'm not done with you just yet. I am mindful that you have a rich knowledge of so many things within systems, but also stories. And I want to say thank you for suggesting that activism is a part of us and the work that we do, and how important it is to center that in the work as well. I'm also mindful of your contribution around the still very, very pervasive way in which education and training centers US-centric value systems rather than the IBPOC value systems. I think that we still experience that today. And so I'm always curious about how and when will those things change within our Canadian arts sector. And when, I think we're at an important point in time when we should begin to, again, have voice to those things. So thank you so much for your contribution. I do have one question for you. And I know we've spoken about it in many ways. And it's do you have any concerns for older artists that have contributed to a sector who you feel may not be finding the same access within the sector as it exists right now? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I find at the turn of the century, and that makes me sound ancient. I'm 76, so that's okay. I found things changed, and I've been talking to some of the younger Black people about that. What I found happened was a lot of the Black organizations that were around before are no longer. Some of the people have died. When we taught culture in this Black activism, we taught people who they were, regardless of where you came from. You brought a lot. We were not here as parasites. We were here building this country. It's a very, very young country. I say to people, Canada is young. The Caribbean is 500 years. Africa is thousands of years old. I mean, like hello. And again, I have a different perspective. For me, people of African descent and people of Indian descent, we're Black. Okay? I don't see Indians as brown. That's something to divide us. Can you imagine if Africa and India connected? So I see us as all one people with different ethnicities. Okay? I found what began to happen is because we didn't have the money to sit in luxury and write our experiences down, a lot of what the older people have done has disappeared. And so, like, what the work that the Cultural Pluralism Organization is doing is phenomenal, because most people would not have known what I have done. Vera Kojo, most people would not have known what she has done, and so many other people. What's happening now is because they're not documented and the money is not there for that. With the younger people and the younger Black organizations, they tend to be teaching people how to organize themselves, do well, making money, which is very important, but not teaching them the culture. You are here bringing with you a rich culture that is developing the culture of this country. Canada doesn't have a culture yet. We are building it. All the people from Africa, from India, from China, from Europe, from everywhere, we are building on a foundation of indigenous people. Indigenous people own this country. And I know, we give, service to them, lip service to them when we start on different things. But are we really and truly respecting what they have done for this country? It's really important to bring that. And in the school where I was, I made sure that they were aware of that and acknowledged them in a serious way. And we're building on that. I think with the older people, we need to find some way of bringing what they have done to the fore so that the young people don't feel they're starting from scratch. I visited NIA yesterday, NIA Cultural Center, which is a Black cultural center. They had no idea who I was. They had no idea who I was. They were so excited when I began to talk because when you're a walking history book, I said that if you talk to Vera Kojo, she's 95. She's still alive. She's 95. And I said, you know, you talk to a lot of other people. Kay Livingston was born here. She was actually born here. And she's the first Black person to have a television program. Way before I had landed here in the 1970s. And then it just suddenly disappeared. Her people were quite prominent. And that sort of history gives you an incredible basis on which to stand.
Thank you.
I think a lot of our young people miss it.
On that note, thank you. That's the best segue ever into whom I want to introduce next, which is Thandiwe McCarthy. Thandiwe's contribution, Digging for Gold, the search for Black artists in New Brunswick, was a poignant piece situating Blackness in the arts, culture, and society in geographic spaces not often acknowledged as sites of Blackness and having Black presence. I first experienced Thandiwe's work through an Instagram post. And I immediately was like, I have to reach out. Because we had this conversation also about when did Black bodies arrive into this particular country to contribute to the culture of the country that we see. And we know that for many, it's generations, 7 generations and counting. And they're either coming to the country and contributing from many aspects of spaces, often undocumented or not seen as Black spaces. Thandiwe, come in at the thing, my friend, because and talk about your contribution to the publication and some of the things that I know. I'm curious about, you know, this lineage of Blackness that exists in spaces like the space in which you're from.
Hey everybody, I had a whole thing prepared, but geez, after listening to Amah, I'm going to first thank the CPAMO for allowing me to contribute and talk about the history. And second, just some thoughts of you talking about looking into the history and building this phenomenal hate. Oh, that just resonated with me. I had to write those words down. And not identifying with the activism part until long after, because it was just something you did through history and art and teaching. It was already a part of you. The art and the activism was the same thing. I'm in the beginning of my journey, so now I'll start proper. I only started this about 4 years ago. Every February, Black History Month, birthday's February 9th, people would ask me, how are you celebrating Black History Month? And I never knew the answer to give them. It felt like I was being put on a stage as soon as they asked. And I had to start dancing, and I was going to give them the right answer that would allow them to clap for me and say, yes, you are doing it right. That is how you celebrate Black history. But I didn't know. Was it movies? Was there books? Was there a curriculum? I didn't know how to discover myself, and this friction caused me to be, go through an annual depression at this time, because you're getting older, you reflect, and you don't know who I am or where I'm going. So I did what, most kids do when they're in that position. They ask their mom, I'm curious about masculinity, Blackness. Is there any books that you could offer me to, expand on this? And she handed me this book on the Blacks in New Brunswick. And it was a fantastic book written by a Professor William Spray at St. Thomas University here in New Brunswick. He actually went into the St. John communities, and it detailed all of the things for hundreds of years that Blacks have contributed to. And what was weird going through the education system, being treated like a threat, and constantly I was I was faced with this thing like, oh man, it's wild to be me. And reading the Blacks in New Brunswick, it was almost like, not only is this something that happens to me, it's something that happens to other Black individuals, and it's something that's been happening across time. Well, now I have to do something. That's what started that phenomenal hatred of me of, I can't walk off this earth without contributing to putting up walls to keep this from happening. I have to do this. So I called up St. Thomas University. The book was out of print for 50 years. And I asked the head communications person, Jeffrey Carlton, can we get this republished? Can we do something about this? This is all we have. For Blacks in New Brunswick, no one knows I'm a 7th generation Black New Brunswicker. My family can date it back to before this province was a province in 1785, an election which the Blacks were not allowed to vote in, even though they were the labor that cleared the trees and helped build the houses and rip the roots out of the ground for all of the individuals to actually build on top of this land. It, stolen land built with stolen labor. So I asked Jeffrey Thompson, and he said, yes, let's do it. And the old cover, I'll show you, was this horrible, starving face of a Black individual over the imprint of the New Brunswick province. And I said, that ain't going to do. So how about we get my cousin, Carrie Nash of Carried Away Creations, and my other cousin, Jennifer Dow, who's a local historian here, and we put photos of actual Black New Brunswickers who can trace their history back over the provincial logo. And we reprinted this, and anyone who buys this from St. Thomas, the money goes into a scholarship for Black students to help them get their education. So that was route one. Then I started to dig into poetry and started wondering, where are the other Black artists? Now that I'm seeing the stuff that's affected the education system to the Black people, where are our songs? Where are our dancers? Where are our magazines? Where are our books? And I just started asking around. I remember I was at going to UMB at that time, and Funky Ella Djembe, who the history professor there, very important to my personal growth. She gave me a book about a professor at Dalhousie called You Must Be a Basketball Player, where he discussed, how even as a grown adult who's earned his PhD and is a professor on campus, people still think he just plays for the basketball team, which was another shock of like, oh my goodness, this happens even if I make it, even if I work my hardest and I accomplish something, and it's still, I still can't avoid this dome that's been put around my culture that we're always have to be what everyone says we are. We can't define ourselves. How miserable. But anyway, I walked around with this clipboard asking, Black individuals on campus, hey, are you creative? What do you do? Do you think you could make money? Would you like to make money doing art? Or do you feel like you're an artist? And there was this barrier between professional artists and even being an artist. It seemed like the Black individuals here that I talked to felt scared to put on the hat that is the artist. And they didn't feel like they knew what to do or how, even though some of our greatest artists are self-taught and just like they trailblazed the way for people to build curriculum off of to teach everyone else. Like, even though that is in our history, the people that start on their own today from the African diaspora seemed skeptical because all the role models that we prop up are, of course, from other cultures, not our own. And I said, well, what if we started something? What if we started an organization where we could just sit and chat? And they said, yeah, I would love that. So David Woods from the Black Artists Network, Nova Scotia, came down to New Brunswick. He said, if you put 7 people in a room, I'll help you build a nonprofit organization to organize artists. I brought 12 people in the room. And from there, the New Brunswick Black Artist Alliance was born. And we've had, for the last 3 years running, gallery shows at the Gallery on Queen, where artists have sold artwork. We're our 2nd year of a film festival. And most importantly, we are in year 3 of planning our Emancipation celebration. And this is where the history part was so important to us, because we realized that there's something that comes before activism and artist. Long before we even define terms, we kind of just have to hang out with each other. There's something spiritual about storytelling and the history that binds us before we can even decide how we would like to add to that narrative. Before you decide you're a painter, you have to hear the history of the land and the region you're in to say, oh, this is what I'd like to paint to contribute to that narrative. And so when Justin Trudeau, what was it, a couple years ago, said Emancipation, August 1st is nationally going to be recognized as Emancipation Day, and all the other provinces started going around, me and a group of people said, okay, let's go to the government and, you know, lobby them to say we should have New Brunswick declare August 1st Emancipation Day. And not only that, we should have in August an emancipation celebration, an event that brings us all together. And that's what my piece that I contributed talks about. It's a three-part event. The first event is just elders in the community standing on the steps of City Hall in the capital of New Brunswick, Fredericton, giving stories to share. And we all sit around the water fountain, tons of pictures, and we just listen to what they have to say and the things they've gone through. So we don't have to keep repeating the things that other people have tried, and they can say, there's a different way, or here are some wisdom and best practices to help you go a little faster. After that, we have a memorial walk for any of the elders or people in our community that passed. The second year was Skip Talbot. He was one of the first people to go really far in electrical. Hold on, I'm going to get it wrong. So I'm just going to say he's very well noted in the community, and he was one of our first speakers, and he passed between the first and the second one. And so we printed out a big banner, and we had a memorial walk for him. And we walked from City Hall to the Legislation Building, where music, free food, everyone's invited. We just bring people in, we just bring them together, and that's the celebration. The history's at the front, we move together with the walk, and at the end, we all just hang out. And that's really what the whole scope of my thing of digging into legacies is, because as I looked in the history of New Brunswick, I really found it's not just Black artists that have this distance from the word artist. It was all New Brunswick artists. There was a strong, surely at the margins, the Black artists were further away than other cultures. But even still, if you go to other provinces and see the infrastructure they have for artists to start them off, to build them, it was more put in. And I put some stats in my article and just how participation with the arts in New Brunswick is the lowest in Canada. The province, we don't see ourselves as culture builders for the people that are, you know, that have that responsibility put on them. And, yeah, I would just say from that started me to say, okay, I have to put this on myself. What's the next thing I can do? And I heard on the news one day, speaking of phenomenal hatred, that there was this historian saying that slavery never happened in New Brunswick. And he was just saying very, very ignorant things. So I pitched to Canada Council a project where I'd partner with the provincial archives, take historical documents documenting the slavery that happened in New Brunswick, along with the successes. And when emancipation happened, 1833, 34, and 1855 in New Brunswick, all the leaders of the province were gathering with prominent Black entrepreneurs and artists and activists and having dinners. So we were celebrating it better hundreds of years ago than we did today in New Brunswick, which is a wild thing to realize. And so I wanted to create a poetry book out of that. And it has gone to the point where I realized that the only thing that the government and institutions capture of our culture is whenever we are in trouble or incarcerated, or whenever we're doing things like the only thing in the news, you would not believe the amount of articles I've read of too many Blacks are dancing with white people down at the local tavern. And this was like a headline article in the newspaper for St. John, is that they felt they had to to watch and police our enjoyment, that we had to enjoy ourselves as a culture outside of their view. Maybe their vision of us is so limited they can't handle having a wider, more complex definition of blackness. Their brains would explode. But anyway, so I said, okay, I'm going to go to 15 different families in New Brunswick, black families that can trace their history back to the 1800s. We're going to go to their houses. We're going to take photos. We're going to scan in family photos and documents. I'm going to write poetry, and we're going to get an essay from them. And we're going to put that in a book so that when this is done, no one's going on CBC to talk any bull about the history they should have already learned when they went through university. And I'd just like to say, if you go to the Canada Council website right now, this project is featured on the front page. We've just recently landed Goose Lane, the oldest independent publisher in Canada, as a publisher for this book. We are going to have an art gallery exhibition 2025 at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery, and we want all the black families from across Canada to show up. And we plan to tour this all over the place. We've got brochures of us going to each of these families' homes, and we've taken photos of families in the rain. Like, we've had 30 people all in a room. We found that when you're having family photos, like, when's the last time all of us here have even had a family photo? It's weddings and funerals. And when you do that, when you bring people together and you ask them to bring out their family documents and historical artifacts, all of a sudden your grandkids get to see you as a kid. The stories that are generated when we're at these family homes is amazing. And I'm just doing whatever I can to not only dig into the legacies, but to preserve them. And when I look for what's lasted 15 generations back, even the buildings have crumbled, but we still have the books. So this book is going to last for the next 300 years when it comes out, 2025.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And what you're also highlighting is how most African diaspora cultures, a lot of cultures actually, oral traditions is what we use to pass things forward. But as Amah said, sometimes when others transition, those things also transition with those particular persons. I want to say thank you. And I have one question, if you could answer real quickly. What are some of the lessons you are learning as a cultural builder in the region?
I would keep things very simple. I think we read a lot of books and listen to a lot of motivational talks that give us these best blueprints. And I found the one thing that constantly works is sitting down and eating food with people. Honestly, it is that simple. It is not, when we talk about creating and activism, start a potluck. Start a potluck for some time in December, create the food, and your activism is picking up that pot of chili and bringing it to the table and sharing it with people and having people compliment you on if it's too spicy or not hot enough. Let the food be the art you create. We can all start there, and then painting, singing, theater, all that can stem from that. But let's create food and stories first. And you wouldn't believe, I have several white hairs in my beard, and I've only done this for 4 years. So when this afro's pure white, you'll know I've done some stuff.
Thank you. Thank you for centering food as actually art, and the idea of food and gathering as a space where anything else can happen. Thank you so much. I would like to invite into the conversation now Ilene Sova, whose contribution, Unknown Relative, Art, Exhibition, Essay, and Reflection, where she sought to debunk the assumption of creative inspiration and locates family and history into her practice, and suggests that we create an imagined world where the land is celebrated, imagining how ancestors survived under the rules and the societal norms of a place that wasn't theirs. Offer a future for creative resistance, full of life, hope, imagined, and the real and existing futures. Ilene.
Hello. Thank you so much, Amah and Thandiwe, for your amazing presentations. I'm so inspired right now. My mind is just spinning. I want to thank Amah in particular for the way that she described her legacy intersecting with politics of the time, and how the governments and the legal system all affects what we can do and how we can create together. And then Thandiwe, I actually teach painting at OCAD University, and I'm going to take this amazing quote from you about thinking about the narrative where you are before you create a new narrative in painting. I think that's such a thoughtful and meaningful way to get students to really think through their positionality before they begin a project. So I just want to share that. I really, really loved that point in your talk. I'm going to share my screen, and I just want to ask Kevin quickly. I think there's one person after me, and I don't want to go over time. Would you say about 10 minutes would be good?
You know, I always say this, I always say this. I say Palmer run the festival here, so time is something we don't have to worry about. If people could stay beyond 3 because we might be going a little bit over, no problem. But everybody sort of has 10 minutes to do their thing. You know, I will have a question for you at the end. But no, man, we're good. I think I'm looking also at my screen, and I know the dear colleague of mine that will be coming up after, and she ties a lot of things in together very succinctly, and it will be an easy flow. No worries at all.
Okay. It's telling me to share my screen. I have to leave and quickly come back. Sharing is the process and then the images of an exhibition that I did about my history from the islands of the Bahamas. This is a photo, just so you can see the end result before I get started, of the opening reception, and just so you can see the size in relation to people and the scope of the project. So there was over 60 collages, and they were the size of record albums. And I'm going to explain why they were that size as it connects with my history growing up in a diasporic household. So this is a photograph of my grandfather, who I knew as George Farrington. And he immigrated to Canada via the World War II. He was someone who was an 18-year-old young man. He wanted to travel. He wanted to go fight the Nazis. He had all that bluster in him. And when he signed up with the RCAF in the Bahamas, they noticed that he had mechanical abilities. He's a mechanic. So they said, we don't need you to go to Germany or to go to England. We don't need you to go to Europe. We want you to go to Nova Scotia in Canada and work on the airplane engines that are going to fly over and bomb Germany. So he didn't end up going to the front lines, which probably saved his life in the end. But he ended up loving Canada and decided to immigrate to Canada through a immigration policy that allowed men who had fought in World War II to easily go to any of the colonies. And this is how he ended up in Toronto. He passed when I was 13 years old, and I lost all connection with the Bahamas at that point. The journey for this project began with this moment. I have a beautiful photograph by David Howe of a dance performance by COBA, the Community of Black Artists. And I think Kevin was in this performance. I'm not 100% sure, but I was working at Harbourfront as the educational coordinator. And we did this amazing partnership with COBA for Black History Month, where the children would see this dance, and then they would create udu drums made of clay and learn all about the symbols of that culture as part of Black History Month. And while I was watching this, I was so inspired, and I started to think, I really don't know a lot about my history from the Bahamas, and I really wanted to delve into that and understand my story and my narrative. Because as we know, when people migrate, they hide stories, they hide histories, they try to pass. They often don't share their narratives with their children. And this really did happen in my family. So when I went home that Christmas, I found my grandfather's photo album. And he was an artist himself. He made sculptures, he made paintings. He was a street photographer. He took beautiful, beautiful photographs. And we were lucky to inherit this massive photo album with hundreds and hundreds of photos. And you can see here how he inscripted each photo with location, names, dates. And we're so thankful that he did this, because my archival research was much easier because he did this work and let us know, even at points who took the photo, what road they're on, what year it was. So it was just an amazing beginning of this journey to just go through this photo album. And when I first picked it up, a small envelope actually fell out of the back. And in that envelope was this photograph. This photograph is probably from about 1885, and it's a carte de visite, which is, if people don't know, it's a little visiting card that Victorians would leave at your house if they came by and you were not home. And it was kind of to tell people, look, I was here. And people would come home from wherever they were and they would find these little photos and know that a friend had visited. And I was just so enraptured by this beautiful photograph. This woman, she looks almost like she's in defiance. Like, I find her expression to be so confident and so arresting in the way that she views us and stares at us. And then just this idea of her beautiful dress and her hair and the way that her hands are leaning over this. I always think of this as a drum. I think it's more of a table that she's leaning on, but to me, when I first saw it, it looked like a beautiful West African drum. So there were just all these questions I had. And when I turned over the photo, it just said unknown relative on the back. And this was also a bit of a shock because my grandfather had been so good about documenting everyone's name. But on this photo, he just wrote unknown relative. So I began this search to find out who she was. And this search started with really just Googling. So I Googled my grandfather's name, which was George Farrington, and a post came up on Ancestry.com, and it was someone from the Bahamas who wrote, "We're building a family tree about the Farrington family, and we really want to know anyone who has the last name Farrington, who came from Nassau, and we want to insert them into this family tree because we're doing this research project." So I reached out to this person, and his email was Islander Greg, and I reached out to him and I said, "I live in Toronto. My family's last name is Farrington, and my grandfather's name was George." And he wrote back and he said, "We have no cousins named George, but good luck with your search. There's, many different people with that last name, but I don't think you're from our family." And I just had this weird feeling, and it's one of those moments when you're researching and you just have a gut instinct. And I called my father and I said, "Can I ask a really weird question?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, is grandfather's name George, or did he have another name?" And my dad said, "Actually, his name is Alfonso. His name is not George." And so this was one of the first kind of big shocks where I realized how much colonization had really blocked me from understanding my family history and my story, to the point that I find out that my grandfather changed his name to George to fit in Toronto. So he chose like the king's name from when he was born, because he didn't want to sound too ethnic, or he didn't want to appear too ethnic. So he changed his name to George to fit in better. And my whole life, I called him Grandpa George, and my brother's middle name is George. He was named after him. And this is all fake. It's not really his name. So this was the first kind of, real insight into how much colonization had affected the understanding of my story. So I wrote back to Islander Greg and I said, "Do you know anyone named Alfonso?" And then he instantly wrote back and he said, "Yes, he's my cousin and I have all kinds of stories." And then we exchanged numbers and he called me. We talked for hours. And then he sent these two photos to me over email. So on the right-hand side is my great-great-grandmother and her daughters. And on the left side is my great-great-grandfather and the sons. So the first time I saw these ancestors was via email through this conversation that started from a post on ancestry.ca. And then this began like a very long journey of me traveling down to the Bahamas, meeting my cousins, going to the National Archives, going to grave sites, finding documents. And what I discover is that my great-great-great-great-grandmother was an enslaved woman named Mary, who ended up marrying the enslaver, and his name was William. And when he married her, he moved her into the house. And then he bequeathed his mixed race children with land. And what this meant was that through decades and decades and decades, my family in Nassau had A, light skin privilege, and B, had financial wealth because of this land that they were given by this person. And I know a lot of people have these histories from the Caribbean that start with, very complicated relationships within these labor camps. And I understood that my father and grandfather were light skinned, but to actually see the documentation as a visual artist of that was so life changing. So this is a photograph I took at the Bahamian Archives. And you can see this is a list of the enslaved people that this person had on his work camp. And you can see where here it says mulatto. This would be one of my ancestors. And as you look through these documents, you eventually see that he benevolently allowed the freedom of his mixed race children. And it's all documented in here. And then it shows in his will the land that he gave them. And here you can see me meeting with one of my cousins, and she's got all the documents. They had been doing research for about 20 years by the time I met them. And she is telling me how the old folks, when they went to the generation older than them and said, we're doing this, we want to find out our history, we want to know the truth. Even in the, mid 2000s, these senior, elders in our family didn't want to talk about these histories. They said, no, that's in the past, don't talk about it. We don't want it written down. We don't want people to know any of this. So that it was like pulling teeth, she said, to get these relatives to even tell these stories. So I was fortunate enough to then hear them from her, and they shared all they had about a 20-page family tree that they gave me, and explained all of these complicated histories to me. So over the years, I had been thinking, how do I, make a art show or an exhibition out of these histories and out of the feelings that I was having about these stories and about these narratives. And because I'm a painter and a drawer, I wanted to paint these people. I wanted to paint their portraits, and I kept painting them and painting them and painting them, but it didn't feel right. And then over COVID, I know a couple of people have already talked about how COVID really caused artists to think about things in a new way and to be inspired, because we had to problem solve in new ways. And over COVID, I started to make a lot of collages, and an art gallery director contacted me, and she said, I just love your collages. I'd like to do something with you for the Contact Photography Festival. And we had a long talk about these histories and that I was working with them. And she really encouraged me to try collage and see what would happen. And so what you're going to see is that resulting collage series that I created for the Contact Photography Festival for that solo exhibition. So to begin with, I just want to go through my aesthetic choices and why the collages look the way that they do. So if you saw them in real life, you'd see there's a lot of glitter. There's a lot of beautiful, sparkly elements within the collages. And this has to do with my kind of my generation and what my influences were as a child living in a house that would be, second generation Bahamian. So my father was a huge music person. He was brought up with calypso music with my grandfather. And then he, as a young man, was really into Afrofuturism and had all the Afrofuture funk albums. So you can see Boney M, Night's Flight to Venus. And I would just sit as a child. I have such vivid memories of staring at this album, opening it up, looking at the beautiful women that were in this cover and their glitter caps. And I was just obsessed with this aesthetic, this space, the technology, the stars, everything that was glittering. And when I was about 4 or 5, all I could dream of was having a glitter cap like these beautiful women inside of this cover. The second influence was that my my grandfather's cousin, Eric Minns, was a quite famous calypso singer in the Bahamas. And he wrote a book called Island Boy, and it was really about his immigration to Toronto with my grandfather and what it meant to be a Caribbean man in Toronto and to yearn for home, but to go home and to not feel at home anymore. A lot of people have that story of feeling apart and in between, this hybridity. So I read his book. The book was, always in our house on the coffee table. And then we were listening to his calypso records, and I would see these beautiful images of the Junkanoo Festival. And then the third aesthetic influence would be these stamps. So my grandfather was constantly writing home, and he would come to visit our family, and he would always take off the little stamps very carefully and then put them in my tiny little hand. And after he left, I would just sit and stare at this iconography that was on the stamps, like this national iconography. So I would look at coconuts and shells and palm trees and flamingos, and I would just imagine this false tropical paradise in another place, and just yearn to go there. So these were really, really my three big influences in terms of how the visuals in the work went. This is a picture of the studio while the work is in process. So you can see all the glitter paper, and you can see how I began to build this narrative and this story through putting all the images up on the wall, stepping back, looking at them, trying to figure out what's working, what's not. It's almost like a living sketchbook, I would say, a living collage sketchbook, where every time I had an idea, I would put it up and then stare at it and move things around. So the whole process took about a year. And one of the main things that I did that I was really excited about in terms of thinking through a theme of decolonization was I found a wallpaper book called Wallpapers of Buckingham Palace. And what I did was I cut into the wallpaper with the actual plants that would be surrounding the people in the Bahamas. You can see here, it was so satisfying, because one of the things that I really noticed about the photography collection and the images of my ancestors was that even though they were in the Caribbean, there was no site or aesthetic clue that they were in the Caribbean. Everything looked like they were in England. They were wearing these heavy clothes, these big hats. I can't imagine how hot they were. One of the things I learned from a Bahamian scholar named Grace Turner is that the more British you looked, the more British you acted, the safer you were in that community. So people would go really out of their way to be as British as possible in order to survive in that community. Hold on. For some reason,
Ilene, thank you so much. I wonder if maybe you could show to end one of the images that arrives in the publication where we get to see the amalgam of all those things together. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm just... Okay. It's kind of glitching. Hold on a sec. Okay. So here you can see the photograph of my ancestors, and what I've done is actually place them in the Caribbean, and I've taken what would normally be like the British lace doilies that people would have in their living room and turn them into more of a Junkanoo symbonology. So I'm looking at my relatives and then replacing them or decolonizing through imagery of land and place in order to situate them where they actually are. This is another image of a cousin. Her name is Faye. This is an image of my grandfather. And I also used the Victorian wallpaper to kind of create a veil. So you get this understanding that I'm trying to understand this place, but I can't actually see it. So there's always something in the way that is preventing me from actually understanding the story due to colonization. These are some of the images where my grandfather goes to Canada during the war. And then the exhibition ends in Toronto. So here you can see the family in Cabbagetown. And then I'll just down here to in the installation, I also put his paint box to honor his presence in the exhibition as an artist. And then I ended with this image of the unknown relative, which I finally found out who she was, and I dedicated the show to her. So her name ended up being Candace Merlin Farrington, and she was a cousin of my grandfather's. So yeah, it was very exciting. And I'll just stop sharing. Stop share. There.
Thank you so much. That was thorough.
Yeah.
I love the connection through the research, the history, and the reimagination that you did with those particular images away from a sort of Eurocentric lens and grounding them again in that Caribbean lens. Thank you so much. Talking about like reshifting and refocusing, I mean, I can profess my love for Nova. She knows that. We're kindred in so many ways from a very long time in our artistic practice. But what Nova did was actually reshifted the way I thought about actually what a contribution to an article was going to be, because she wanted to offer a journaling of her work into the publication as a contribution. And so I want to invite Nova into the conversation about Our Time Is Now, which navigates personal thought, reflection, and the need to respond to creation after a pandemic as a source for creative liberation in practice. And she did that as I thought about the publication. And if you haven't seen Swaha, we will end with a showing, a small showing of Swaha. Nova, tell us about your contribution.
Hi, Kevin. Well, having heard the previous speakers, again, the same sense of, humility and unworthiness when you first approached me, and I knew who some of the people contributing to this were going to be. And also, as you had said, even in your invitation, which came about, 3 weeks before this major production that I'd been working on for so long was about to premiere, and it seemed not viable to do anything that would sufficiently contribute to the weight of what CPAMO was trying to do with this publication. And at the same time, I was feeling similar to things that other speakers have said, that there was a need for our voices to be heard and for our voices to have the permission and the privilege to speak from where they were in that moment. And where I was in that moment was completely buried in this long creation process that had been interrupted by the pandemic. So I thought to myself, okay, the brain vomit of an artist and, pages and pages of journal entries that had been written during the pandemic, that, this idea that books will outlive us all, and that there could be some value for some other artist in the future to read this and just go, yeah, it's okay sometimes to be in the place and in the moment you're at, and to just share what's going on and real and vibrating in the moment. So I was very, and Kevin, your invitation very specifically said that you were not going to put constraints on the imagination, and that we were able to go to the places we wanted to go to. So I really took that to heart.
And
I think
yes, walk us through the compilation and the contribution itself as it existed, because you also had some drawings and notes and different things that offered a different sense of imagination as part of the publication.
It was very much trying to verbalize and also visualize or create a visual sense of the journey that I was on, and the idea that the pandemic was this portal, and then the vaccine was discovered, and it felt like the portal was closing, and what had we learned, and how were we really moving forward, and really feeling that the pandemic, this moment where we were watching our humanity turned into statistics all over the world, and living and working in Takaranto, where we had the longest lockdowns of any city in the world, and how that impacted the work and how it also benefited and contributed to really important conversations that we were able to have with artists during that time. And to really just think about the fact that that moment had value in and of itself and wasn't just something that was passing through, and how to find ways as artists to really lean into the unknown. And especially as creative contemporary artists, that's that place that we exist in. So while the world was unraveling, for us to somehow be stitching something together, and for CPAMO to be creating this publication that was going to create a record of the work that's happening in this country that we call Canada now. And when I think about cultural transformation, and I'm in Montreal at the moment, it's the first time Parcours Danse, a dance showcasing event, has permitted organizations from outside of Quebec to come and share their work, and to be here representing Toronto with a third of the cast of SWAHA, and still to really feel this sense of literally and figuratively bringing the color into the room is really, it's a strong moment. And through the pandemic, I think some of us we had the privilege, because we were working, because we had projects going on, to find a way to have some collectivity. The way Amah was talking about not separating Black and Brown and seeing our struggles together, or if artists, if all we really are just these agitating grains of sand with purpose, but if we have some collectivity, those grains of sand can come together and become a pebble, and then a rock, and then the landslide. And I think that we're really, and I'm having conversations with people now, even where on one hand it feels, yes, it's hopeful and things are shifting and things are changing and we're finding our voice. And we're also saying, okay, but there's retrenchment going on. And we're seeing organizations like the AGO with their treatment of Wanda Nanabush, like how much there's been a lip service to decolonization without the true intention to follow through. So I don't know, I'm just sort of putting all this into the sphere, and that was what the tone of my article became as well, was just a little bit stream of consciousness of all these things that feel important and critical at this moment.
At this moment right now, given that the entire full circle of it all, what's most current for you? And I would love for you to also talk about maybe something else that came from the invitation, from the documenting, the journaling, which is a whole book.
Yes.
Around the moments.
Yeah, I mean, I also, when you asked me to write, even in my mid-50s, I still think of myself as an emerging writer, because I haven't given the same time and space and rigor to writing as I have given to other crafts that I do. And then while we were in this process, a young Tamil writer, Branavi Jayasundaram, she was in pre-pandemic. She was going to be part of the cast of SWAHA, which was going to even be a larger cast. And she was going to write about the experience from the inside. And then the pandemic happened, and, these things shifted. But we just, like, from the very beginning, even before the writing project and even before the collaboration with Dance Collection Dance to publish the book came about, from October 2018 onwards, when dancers started working on the process, they were contracted that they would be asked to write a piece of reflection on their experiences in the process. Because, even in the nascent stages of the project, when I didn't know what the final outcome was going to be, I knew that it was really important to capture that this work was actually happening, and the many things that were trying to be accomplished. Like, yes, as a choreographer, I'd been yearning to work with scale because of the depth and the textures and the architecture that can be accomplished with multiple bodies in space. And I wanted to shift the narrative of who we see on stage. And also, it was about developing the field. It was about creating longer-term contracts for dancers who are working outside of culturally dominant dance practices. And it was about finding a way to bring them into this world that I knew existed for other dance artists and other forms. And so, yeah, so the writing and the documenting was really vital and important. And the thing I think for me primarily as a performing artist, what I find stressful about words, but I'm trying to learn this with these different publications, is to just understand that just as our live performances are perfectly imperfect, even the words that we have to offer, they capture a moment in time, and maybe we'll look back on them and go, oh, I've changed the way I think about that now. But as you said in your invitation, it was so important to document the voices. And because Swaha had this cast of 22 artists, now we have a book where each of those artists has been captured in their words and in their thoughts and in their feelings. And that absolutely, in terms of the cultural transformation of this country that we call Canada, I think it's really, really important that our existence is documented.
Thank you. And I'm going to end and introduce Swaha with a quote from your article, that being the change is the only way to make change. Making the art, amplifying our voices, and insisting on being a part of the Canadian cultural canon is an active strategy towards achieving. Thank you so much, Nova. And with that, we will end this session with